In the last two podcasts, we talked about driving performance down to the work cell, creating those targets, letting your supervisors know how they're performing and how they can improve their performance. As well, we also talked about the next step of that. Once they know their targets, they know where they need to focus, generating the ideas that are going to drive savings. So the foundations of generating ideas, different ways, brainstorming, getting the group together to look at an issue on the shop floor and how to from those gaps, how to create ideas. And today we're going to look at how to convert those ideas into actual savings, because ultimately, if you're in any leadership position, the board, the general manager, the president, vice president, the corporation are ultimately going to want cash in their pockets at the end of the month. And the only way you can do that is by driving savings. This is podcast number 8 of Leadership Unscripted. And today we'll go through how to convert those gaps, those ideas into savings. So first thing we can look at is ultimately you have to review performance and you have to track it. So that was 2 podcasts ago where we talked about that. And if you haven't seen that podcast, go back to it. And if you have any questions, send me an email or even leave comments and I can get back to you. The second aspect of that was generating ideas from those gaps in performance, using your employees' suggestions to generate those ideas. So now that you've identified the gaps and you have all sorts of ideas, you've got a massive pipeline of ideas. Now what do you do with those? How do you convert those into savings? When you look at it, there's 2 different types of ideas that I sort of consider. The first one being the low-hanging fruit. Everybody's heard that word for a billion times in the last many decades. It's just the word that everybody likes to use. Well, unfortunately, it is what it is. Low-hanging fruit. So the things that can be implemented really easily on your shop floor. And then you have, I guess an example of that would be an employee comes up with a suggestion to use a different tool. So currently using this tool and you want to use that tool for a machining perspective. And it's going to allow you to speed up your cycle time and ultimately speeding up or reducing your cycle time is going to allow you to put or pump more parts through that machine, which is going to save you money. So that's a simple implementation, low-hanging fruit. The other side of that is capital-intensive stuff. You talk about robotics. Nowadays it's artificial intelligence. There's a billion videos out there on artificial intelligence, but nothing really substantial yet from a point of easy implementation on the shop floor. But we're talking about capital intensive, whether it's big robotic lines, big machines. That can be a lot more tricky because now you need to get buy-in. You have to have a really good project plan for that. So those are the 2 aspects. As well, when you're talking about savings and looking at calculating savings, well, is what you're going to do actually going to hit the bottom line? Is it going to hit the net income? So you've got the hard cost, which is going to hit that bottom line, and you're actually going to see it in dollar savings. And then you got soft cost, where it's improvements, but they're not necessarily going to hit the bottom line. So let's just look through a few different aspects. First example I have here is cycle time reduction. So let's take a look at cycle time reduction on a machine. And since my current industry is CNC machining, we'll talk about CNC machining. But this applies to anything, and it applies to any industry, whether it's the insurance industry, sales industry, whatever. You've got processes where you can do cycle time reduction. So speaking of a machine, the first thing you need to determine, is that machine fully utilized? So if you're running that machine, if you have 5 shifts and, or sorry, 5 days in the week, Monday to Friday, and you have a 2-shift operation, then is that machine have enough product to run those 10 shifts, the day shift and the afternoon shift? If it does, and you have an improvement that can actually allow you to produce more parts during that same period, because you have a backlog of revenue that can go on that machine, then that cycle time reduction is going to have a hard savings. It's going to hit the bottom line because you're going to bring in additional revenue on that machine with the same overhead. So your same facility cost. So you have that building, you have all these people supporting HR, IT people, your quality people, your engineering people. You have all these people supporting the company, and you're able to increase the revenue, which means that you're going to increase, you're going to increase dollars coming in because you're going to have a percentage of the revenue you bring in is going to hit the bottom line once you take away the operating expenses and the cost of goods. So you're going to bring in additional dollars that are going to convert onto the income statement. So that is a hard cost savings. So that's really important when you're looking at cycle time reduction, that it's only going to be hard cost savings in a sense if that machine's already fully utilized and you're able to bring in more work onto that machine. The second example is a quality savings. So let's say you have this part XYZ that runs, you run one part every shift across those 10 shifts. So you get 10 parts a week, and that converts to a particular revenue or sales per week on that machine. But of those 10 parts that you run, you generally, on average, have about 2 parts of those 10 parts that usually get scrapped out. So therefore, the material costs, the labor that you put in to those parts ends up being thrown out the door. So you've wasted the labor, you've used the labor, you've used the material, and you didn't get the revenue. So therefore, that if you were able to improve your process to reduce the quality scrap on that particular part, that'd be a hard cost directly to your bottom line. So that's another scenario where you can look at in terms of quality savings. If this part that you're running is like once every 3 years, you run this and you only run 10 parts per year, once a week, every 3 years, and you put in an implementation, you say you're going to, improve it to 100%. So you don't have those parts scrapping. Well, it's difficult to say you're really going to get a real hard cost savings. You will, but it's going to be divided over the 3 years. So it's going to be much less. You can't just say that the savings you get is going to be directly the hard cost savings. It's going to be divided out over 3 years. And if it's a one-time run and you implement an improvement that's never going to be implemented because it was a one-time run, well, you can't really qualify that as a hard cost savings because you're never going to see the actual savings. So the third one to look at is a consumable costs, supplies, whether it's safety glasses, rags, cleaning supplies, deburring media supplies, tooling supplies, screwdrivers, whatever it is that your organization uses, there's an opportunity for hard cost savings. So there's some things that you can do there. You can look at You can look at usage, and you can see are things being wasted. That's one aspect to look at it, to try to maybe start tracking the usage and see if it actually represents what should be happening. Maybe people are just using a pair of safety glasses every day, and they should be using it once every week. Well, you can actually have a hard cost savings on that, and saying you're only allowed to have a pair of safety glasses once a week, unless it's scratched or something. So there are really easy ways to have savings from looking at your consumable supplies, to see to generate real savings. Fourth thing is tooling usage. And I'll give you an example. Maybe not tooling, maybe more the operation of grinding metal or deburring metal using, we'll call it belts. So you know how at home you have, your sanding belt or your sanding disc. Similar concept. So think about it. If you're at home, I want to bring this to home for anybody who actually does woodworking or something of that nature. If when you're sanding that piece of wood and you sand it for maybe 2 minutes, and you take that sanding disc, the sandpaper off it, you look at it, it looks pretty good, and you throw it out. Or when you're sanding it and you sand it till there's no abrasives left, or the little stones that are glued to the paper, until none of that's left. You've used it the full usage, and it lasted you 2 days instead of 1 hour. So you can see that just in this example, how a manual process like a person can inflate the cost of things that are used and disposed of. So through that process, you can actually look and say, okay, there's 10 different people that use this sandpaper at work. I'm going to start tracking how many parts they do and how many pieces of deburring sandpaper they use for those parts. So Joe uses 5 pieces for 10 parts, and Samantha uses 2 pieces for 10 parts. And you do it over a week, you track it, and you start seeing that for the same quality of part, you're actually able to, these people are getting the same quality, and they're using up less deburring media or sandpaper. So once you figure that out, then you could apply that to the rest of the people and say, okay, you're only allowed to use 2 pieces for every 10 parts, or 1 piece for every 5 parts. And if you have an issue, come see me. We'll get the other people to train you on how to do the same thing they're doing. And then through that process, you would start using less deburring media or sandpaper, and that would hit the bottom line, because for the same volume of parts, you'd be using less sandpaper. So that's just sort of a simple example of how you can take someone's idea, maybe they brought that up, and convert that into actual savings that will hit the bottom line. So just going back to soft costs, which I talked about earlier, so that you don't go after projects, I guess initially, that are soft costs. Maybe they have some benefit, but when corporations looking for dollars in the pocket, you can spend all sorts of time on soft cost savings, and it never hits the bottom line. And then, over your short period as a leader, you're sent out because you didn't actually show performance. So soft cost saving examples of things you got to watch, that you focus on the hard costs before you get to these. So an example would be, okay, you create a report for a quality person that really doesn't touch the product directly, or for a supervisor. So they were spending an hour creating, doing something in Excel, collecting data and coming up with a report. You create a report directly from the data using, let's say, Power BI. That seems to be the new thing nowadays, Microsoft Power BI. Very powerful, where you don't have to do anything. So now it's it takes 10 seconds to open up the report and look at it versus the hour. Well, the supervisor already worked for you. You're already paying their wage. Sure, you save them an hour. They're not actually bringing in any additional revenue because they're not the machine. They're not the person directly sanding your parts or directly drilling or milling or assembling your parts. So that's a soft cost. You're not really going to see a direct savings. These are all great things to do to make so that supervisor can spend more time on the shop floor and more time firefighting and being more strategic long term, but they're not going to hit the bottom line necessarily. Another one would be consolidate floor space. So let's say you've got 100,000 square foot operation and you do a lot of relayouts and housekeeping, throw a bunch of stuff out, and you consolidate it down to your operation down to 80,000 square feet, and you've got 20,000 extra square feet. You can't necessarily say that's a hard cost because it didn't bring you any extra revenue and therefore any extra income on your income statement. No extra dollars of cash went into somebody's pocket or into the bank. So unless you're doing a flooring consolidation so that you can bring in a new product, perhaps a new customer is going to use that, is going to sort of take over that 20,000 square foot and you're going to run their products through, and that's going to increase your revenue across the same building structure, the same rent, the same property tax, the same support people. That's a hard cost. So if you're doing a flooring consolidation, it's not hard cost unless you're actually doing it because you're bringing in more revenue. You're adding revenue to the existing revenue. If you're not, then you can't really claim that as a hard cost. And that's more of a soft cost. So that sort of concludes what in terms of generating the savings. And then next week, I'll be going over through podcast number 9, how to generate systems and the follow-up around it. So next week will be more based on you implement all these great ideas on the shop floor, processes, documents for people to follow. They're going to help. They're going to reduce quality issues, blah, blah, blah. But you're seeing these things die off very quickly. So come back in a week. You'll see, you subscribe, most importantly, subscribe so that when I release the next one, you'll get some ideas of how to generate the audit structure so that when you implement a process, you'll actually have it stay implemented and you'll actually see the benefit of that.